It started with a feeling she could not explain, a sudden spark, a strange shock running through her arm. And in that moment, one of the biggest stars in tennis, Coco Gauff, knew something was very wrong, and here is why this matters right now, because what happened in that match could completely change her Miami Open story, and maybe even her entire 2026 season, because when a top player says it felt like fireworks inside their arm, you stop and listen now. Imagine this. You are in the middle of a high-level match. The crowd is watching, the rhythm is building, and suddenly your body does something you have never experienced before. Not pain in the usual sense, not fatigue, but something unpredictable, something that makes you question if you should even continue. That is exactly what happened to Coco Gauff at Indian Wells Open. She was facing eala, a rising player who was already playing fearless tennis. And the match was slipping away, 2-6, 0-2, and then suddenly it was not just about the score anymore. It became about survival. Gauff described it later in a way that honestly gave chills. She said it felt like fireworks, not just during shots, but even when she was not using her arm. Think about that for a second. Pain that is not even linked to movement, pain that spreads without warning. That is what makes nerve issues so unpredictable, and honestly, so scary. She admitted she had never felt anything like it before. And that is coming from a player who has competed at the highest level under extreme pressure. Now here is where things get even more interesting, because this was not just a random injury moment. This was a moment that forced her to retire from the match, and when a player like Coco Gauff retires mid-match, you know something serious is going on. But the real story was just beginning, because the question everyone had was simple: how bad is it? And what does this mean for Miami? And if you are a Gauff fan, or even just a tennis fan, you already know why Miami matters. This is not just another tournament, this is home, this is personal, and that emotional layer changes everything. Now fast forward to Miami, and Coco Gauff steps into the press conference, calm, composed, but you can tell there is still something behind the words. She confirms what many suspected. It was nerve-related, and nerve injuries are tricky, because they are not always visible, they do not always show clear damage, but they can completely disrupt performance. She explains that every day feels different. And that right there is the key detail. Every day is different. That is not the kind of injury where you wake up and say, I am fully healed. That is the kind of situation where you manage, adjust, and hope your body responds. But here is the part that should give fans some relief. She says she feels it less and less every day, and that tells us something important. Recovery is happening, but is it fast enough? That is the real question, because the Miami Open is not a place where you can ease your way. And it demands intensity from the very first match, and if there is even a slight hesitation in her game, opponents will notice, they will test that arm, they will push her physically, and that is where things could get very interesting. Now here is something that really shows her mindset. She admitted that she actually considered skipping the tournament. Think about that, a top player dealing with a scary injury, considering stepping away. That is usually the smart move, but then she says something that changes the entire story. If it was not Miami, she would have skipped it. That tells you everything. This is not just about ranking points. This is not just about competition. This is about identity, playing at home, representing your roots, feeling that connection with the crowd. It means something different, and sometimes that emotional motivation can push athletes beyond what logic would suggest, but it can also be risky because emotions do not heal injuries. Now, let us talk about something that fans do not always think about: the MRI scan. For many athletes, it is just part of the process. But for Coco Gauff, this was her first time, and her reaction was honestly relatable. She described it as feeling like being inside a coffin, claustrophobic, uncomfortable, something she definitely does not want to experience again. And that detail might seem small, but it actually tells us something deeper. This injury took her into unfamiliar territory, not just physically, but mentally, because when you are dealing with something you have never experienced before, there is always that extra layer of uncertainty. Now here is where the story takes another turn, because despite everything, despite the injury, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, she still has a goal. She wants to perform well in Miami, and if you look at her history at this tournament, it has not been perfect. She has never gone beyond the fourth round in 6 appearances. That is surprising for a player of her level, but maybe, just maybe, this year is different. And here is the curiosity gap: could this injury actually become the turning point? Because sometimes in sports, moments that look like setbacks become the start of something bigger. Now, let us break this down from a real tennis perspective. If the injury is nerve-related, it can affect timing, control, and confidence. And in modern tennis, especially at the level Gauff plays, even a small drop in precision can change everything. Her game relies on athleticism, speed, and consistency. If that left arm discomfort affects her balance or rhythm, It could show up in rallies, in defense, in shot tolerance, but on the flip side, if she manages it well, if she adapts, if she trusts her body, she could still be very dangerous because Coco Gauff is not just talented, she is mentally strong, and that is something you cannot measure with scans or reports now. Let me give you my honest take. Think she will play, I think she will fight, but I do not think this will be easy. There will be moments in matches where you might see hesitation, there might be games where she looks uncomfortable, and that is where the real test begins, because champions are not defined by perfect conditions, they are defined by how they respond when things are not perfect. Now, here is something I want you to think about. Is it worth the risk playing through a nerve issue? Even if it is improving, always carries uncertainty, and with the clay season coming up, a crucial part of the calendar, managing health becomes even more important. So the big question is not just about Miami, it is about the bigger picture. Is this the right move for her long-term season, or is this a moment where emotion is taking priority over strategy? And I want to hear your opinion on this. If you were in Coco Gauff's position, would you play Miami despite the injury, or would you skip it and come back stronger later? Drop your answer in the comments, because this is one of those decisions that can define a season. Now, let us talk about expectations, because that is where things get tricky. Fans expect greatness, media expects results, but reality does not always follow expectations. If she loses early, people will point to the injury. If she goes deep, people will call it resilience, and both can be true. That is the complexity of sports. Now, imagine the scenario where she actually makes a deep run. That would change the narrative completely, from injury scare to comeback story, from uncertainty to confidence, and that is why this situation is so fascinating, because it can go in multiple directions, and honestly, that unpredictability is what makes tennis so compelling. Now, before we move forward, let us address something important. There are always rumors in situations like this. Some people might say the injury is worse than reported, others might say it is not serious at all. The truth is usually somewhere in between. What we do know is what she has said publicly, and based on that, the injury is improving, but not completely gone, and that means every match in Miami becomes a test, not just against opponents, but against her own body. Now, let us shift to the emotional side again, because playing at home is powerful. The crowd support, the familiarity, the energy, it can lift a player, but it can also add pressure because expectations are higher, and when you combine that with an injury situation, it creates a very unique challenge. But if there is one thing Coco Gauff has shown throughout her career, it is that she can handle pressure. She has done it on the biggest stages. She has done it against the toughest opponents, and now she has to do it against uncertainty, and that might be the toughest challenge of all. Now, let me paint you a picture of what success would look like in this situation. It is not just about winning the title, it is about managing matches smartly, it is about staying physically stable, it is about building confidence with each round, because sometimes success is not defined by trophies, sometimes it is defined by progress, and if she can leave Miami feeling stronger than when she arrived, that could be a win in itself. But let us not forget, this is Coco Gauff, a competitor, a fighter, a player who does not step on court just to participate. She steps on court to win, and that mindset alone makes her dangerous. So now we are heading into one of the most intriguing storylines of the Miami Open, not just who will win, but how Coco Gauff's journey will unfold. Will it be a story of struggle? Will it be a story of resilience? Or will it be something completely unexpected? Because sometimes the best stories in sports are the ones no one sees coming, and this might be one of them. So keep your eyes on this. Watch how she moves, watch how she reacts in tough moments, because the answers will not just come from scores.